You are nobody, Eleanor. My husband said it so casually that for a moment I thought I had misheard him, the way you sometimes mishear a church bell through heavy rain. Then he laughed, and everyone at the dining room table looked down at their plates as if the roasted chicken I had spent 3 hours preparing had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in Charleston. It was a Sunday evening in late October, warm enough that I had left the back porch door open a few inches, letting in the smell of wet oak leaves and the distant sound of a neighbor's sprinkler ticking across the grass. I had set the table with my mother's ivory china, polished the silver until my hands ached, and folded the napkins into the shape Richard always liked because, after 45 years of marriage, habits can become a kind of prison you decorate yourself. Our son had flown in from Dallas with his wife, Vanessa. Richard's younger brother sat near the window, pretending to study his wine glass. Even Pastor Collins and his wife had stopped by after service because Richard had insisted this would be a small family celebration for our anniversary. 45 years. I used to think that number meant something solid, like brick, like the foundation under a house. That night, I learned it could be wiped away with 6 words and a smile. Richard had been talking about the Whitaker Family Trust, waving his fork as if he were lecturing a room of interns instead of sitting beside the woman who had kept his life stitched together since 1979. He said he planned to simplify things before the end of the year. He said Vanessa had a better head for modern finances. He said I should be grateful not to worry my pretty little head over documents anymore. I did not raise my voice. I only said, Richard, that trust was built with both of our names, both of our work, and both of our sacrifices. That was when he leaned back in his chair, loosened his tie, and laughed. You are nobody, Eleanor. You were just lucky to marry me. The room went so still I could hear the ice shifting in Vanessa's glass. She smiled without showing her teeth. It was the kind of smile women give when they want everyone to know they have already won. My son, Daniel, stared at the tablecloth. Pastor Collins cleared his throat but said nothing. Richard reached for another slice of chicken as though he had merely commented on the weather. I looked at my husband's hands, spotted with age now, the same hands I had held in hospital rooms, at funerals, in court offices, and across cheap diner tables when we had more bills than dollars. I remembered those hands trembling the year his first company almost folded. I remembered signing my name beside his on a bank loan he could not have gotten alone. I remembered selling the pearl bracelet my mother left me so he could make payroll before Christmas and still look like a hero to 26 employees who never knew my wrist felt naked for years afterward. Richard remembered none of that, or perhaps he remembered and preferred the version where I was furniture, polished and quiet, useful only when placed in the right corner. Eleanor, Vanessa said softly, drawing out my name like a ribbon she intended to cut, Richard only means you should rest. At your age, all that paperwork can be confusing. At my age. I was 68, not buried. I still balanced my checkbook to the penny. I still drove myself to the market, volunteered twice a week at St. Mark's Pantry, and could tell you exactly which cabinet held every insurance policy in that house. But I had learned long ago that some people call you fragile when what they really mean is inconvenient. I folded my napkin once. Then again. My hands needed something to do. The old Eleanor would have smoothed the moment over. She would have smiled for the pastor, forgiven Richard before he apologized, and carried dessert into the room as if humiliation could be sweetened with pecan pie. But something inside me had gone quiet, not empty, not broken, just very still. Stillness can frighten you when it arrives after years of swallowing words. It feels almost like peace until you realize it is actually a door closing. I see, I said. That was all. Richard chuckled again, pleased with himself. Don't be dramatic. Nobody is taking anything from you. Vanessa's eyes flickered toward him too quickly. There it was. A small glance, no longer than a heartbeat, but after 4 decades of watching men lie across dinner tables, I knew the shape of a secret when I saw one. I stood and began collecting plates. Mrs. Collins tried to help, but I touched her shoulder gently and told her to enjoy her coffee. In the kitchen, I scraped untouched food into the disposal and watched it disappear, thinking how strange it was that a woman could spend a lifetime feeding people who still believed she brought nothing to the table. Behind me, their conversation resumed in careful pieces. Richard's voice grew confident again. Vanessa laughed at something too loudly. Daniel remained quiet, which hurt more than I wanted it to. When I opened the drawer for foil, I saw the little brass key taped beneath the handle, the one Martha Bell had hidden there years ago after she told me, "Mrs. Whittaker, keep copies of everything." Men with loud voices often misplace the truth. Martha had worked in our home for 25 years. She had seen me before makeup, after arguments, during tax season, and in the gray mornings when Richard's dreams cost more than our accounts could bear. She had been gone almost 9 years, but suddenly I heard her voice as clearly as if she were standing beside the stove in her blue cardigan. "Keep copies of everything." I closed the drawer without taking out the foil. My heart was no longer pounding. That surprised me. Upstairs, after the guests left and Richard fell asleep in the guest room because he said my mood was exhausting, I sat at my vanity and removed my earrings one at a time. My wedding photograph stood beside the mirror. In it, Richard looked handsome and hungry for the world. I looked young enough to mistake hunger for promise. I turned the frame face down. Then I opened the bottom drawer and took out my old address book, the red leather one Daniel once teased me for keeping instead of putting everything in my phone. Most of the numbers were crossed out or faded, but one name was still written clearly in blue ink. Caleb Bell. Martha's son. The boy I had quietly sent through Emory, then Georgetown Law, after Martha got sick and worried he would lose his future. Because she had spent her life cleaning other people's houses. Richard never knew. He would have called it sentimental foolishness. I called it doing one decent thing without needing applause. I stared at Caleb's number for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. My thumb did not shake when I dialed. On the 4th ring, a man answered, older now, careful and professional. Caleb Bell speaking. I looked toward the closed bedroom door, behind which my husband slept peacefully in the house he believed was his kingdom. "Caleb," I said, my voice low but clear, "this is Eleanor Whittaker." There was silence. Then his voice changed. "Mrs. Whittaker?" I took one breath. "I need you to look at some documents for me." The next morning came in pale and damp, with a thin Charleston fog clinging to the windows like breath held too long. I had slept less than 2 hours, not because I was frightened, but because my mind had begun doing what it had done for most of my adult life, adding, sorting, remembering, placing one small fact beside another until a hidden picture started to appear. Richard came downstairs at 7:15, freshly shaved and wearing the navy robe I had bought him for Father's Day 8 years earlier. He poured coffee without looking at me. That had become normal in our house, the kind of silence people mistake for peace because the furniture is expensive and nobody raises their voice. He stood by the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, and said, "I hope you are feeling more reasonable today." Reasonable. I was washing the same china plates he had eaten from the night before. Warm water ran over my hands. A little crack near the edge of one dinner plate caught my thumb, not enough to hurt, only enough to remind me that beautiful things can split quietly for years before anyone notices. "I feel perfectly clear this morning," I said. He gave a short laugh through his nose. "Good. Then you will understand why Vanessa is helping me organize the trust papers. We cannot have things scattered everywhere anymore." We. That was the word that stayed with me. Not you and I. Not our family. We. Richard and Vanessa had formed a little country of their own, and I had become the border they wanted erased. He took his coffee into the sunroom, leaving a ring on the counter. I wiped it away slowly. For 45 years, I had wiped away what Richard left behind. Coffee rings. Excuses. Overdraft notices. Hurt feelings after he embarrassed someone at dinner. Letters from creditors in the early days. Condescending remarks at parties. A marriage can become a long hallway of small cleanups, and by the time you reach the end, everyone praises the man walking ahead while the woman behind him carries the broom. When Richard and I married in 1979, he owned 2 suits, a used Chevrolet, and a confidence so large it filled rooms he had not earned the right to enter. I was 23, with a business degree from the College of Charleston and $28,000 from my grandmother's estate, money my father told me to keep separate because love is not a financial plan. I thought that sounded cold. I thought marriage meant blending everything until there was no mine or yours, only ours. Young women can be generous in ways older women later have to prove in court. Richard had dreams of starting a commercial supply company. He could sell anything to anyone, but he hated ledgers, taxes, vendor schedules, and the dull, necessary work of keeping promises after the handshake. I was good at those things. I built filing systems in our spare bedroom. I typed invoices on a second-hand typewriter while Daniel slept in a bassinet beside my chair. I called overdue clients with a soft voice and a firm calendar. I learned which bankers liked pound cake and which ones preferred numbers presented in columns, not paragraphs. Richard called me his good luck charm back then. I mistook that for gratitude. By our 10th anniversary, Whitaker Supply had a warehouse near North Charleston and 32 employees. At Chamber of Commerce breakfasts, Richard told people he had built it from nothing. I stood beside him in modest dresses, smiling as if nothing had a wife who skipped dental work 1 year so payroll cleared on time. Nothing had a woman who used her inheritance as collateral. Nothing had my signature on 3 loans and my name on the first lease. Yet every time someone said, "Your husband is remarkable," I nodded because I believed protecting his pride was part of loving him. Pride, I would learn, is a room that gets bigger every time you agree to stand outside it. Martha Bell came to work for us when Daniel was 6. She was 32 then, with tired eyes, careful hands, and a little boy named Caleb who waited on our back steps after school with library books stacked on his knees. Martha was never just help to me, though Richard always used that word. Help. As if a woman who knew where every spare key was, which medicine Daniel needed when his allergies flared, and how to calm me when Richard came home carrying another reckless idea was somehow less central than the men who sat in the formal rooms. Martha noticed everything. She noticed the nights I stayed up with spreadsheets after Richard went to bed. She noticed when I sold my mother's pearl bracelet and wore long sleeves for a month because my bare wrist made me feel disloyal to the dead. She noticed the year Richard bought a new Cadillac 2 weeks after telling me we needed to cut household expenses. She never commented in front of him. She would only set a cup of tea near my elbow and say, "You cannot pour from an empty pitcher forever, Mrs. Whitaker." I would smile and say I was fine. Women like me were trained to be fine the way silver is trained to shine, through pressure and polish. After breakfast that morning, I waited until Richard left for his club. He kissed the air near my cheek, already distracted, already certain the world would arrange itself around him. The moment his car backed out of the driveway, I went to the study. It still smelled like his cigars, though he claimed he had given them up. The old filing cabinets stood behind the mahogany desk, the same cabinets I had purchased in 1986 when Richard said cardboard boxes were good enough. The key was not in the drawer where it used to be. I checked the brass bowl by the lamp. Nothing. Then I remembered Vanessa, 2 months earlier, standing in this room with a stack of folders and that sweet little voice of hers saying, "I am just helping Richard modernize." Modernize. Apparently, meant remove whatever Eleanor might need later. I did not panic. Panic wastes time and gives careless people too much credit. I went to the kitchen, opened the drawer with the taped key, and pressed it into my palm. Martha's little insurance policy. The lock turned with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in that quiet house. Inside were decades of our life, sorted because I had sorted them: loan agreements, property records, old tax returns, insurance policies, trust drafts, letters from attorneys, bank statements yellowing at the edges. But several folders were missing. My inheritance file. The original company formation documents. The first property deed for the Charleston house. I stood very still. Missing papers are a language. They tell you what someone fears. At 10:32, my phone rang. Caleb's name appeared on the screen. I answered in the study, surrounded by open drawers and the faint dust of 30 years. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, and his voice was no longer just warm. It was alert. I cleared my afternoon. "Tell me exactly what happened." I looked down at the empty space where my inheritance folder used to be and finally understood that Richard had not insulted me because he believed I was nothing. He had insulted me because he needed me to believe it before I remembered what I owned. Caleb did not ask me to explain my feelings, which made me trust him more than I expected. People who ask for feelings too early often want to turn a problem into a mood. Caleb asked for dates, names, account numbers, document titles, and every place Richard might have stored copies. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had built his life by listening for what other people tried to hide between clean sentences. I sat at Richard's desk with the phone pressed to my ear and a yellow legal pad in front of me, the same kind I had used for grocery lists, church committee notes, and silent calculations during the years when Richard thought money appeared because he wanted something badly enough. "Do not confront him," Caleb said. "Do not mention the missing folders. Do not sign anything. And if Vanessa brings you any documents, tell her you want to review them after lunch and then call me." I almost smiled at how carefully he said Vanessa's name. He had never met her, but he already understood the shape of her. "She has been in this house more often lately," I said. "Helping Richard organize things." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Then assume anything important has been photographed, moved, or prepared for signature." The study window looked out over the side garden where Martha used to grow basil in a cracked clay pot because she said store-bought basil had no soul. Beyond the fence, a dog barked twice and stopped. The world continued with its ordinary little sounds, indifferent to the fact that my marriage had become an investigation. "I found several files missing," I told him. "My inheritance records, the original company papers, the first deed to this house." Caleb exhaled slowly. "Those are not random choices." No, they were not. That was the part that settled coldly in my stomach. Richard had always been careless with receipts, umbrellas, reading glasses, birthdays that were not his own. But these particular documents had not wandered away. Someone had chosen them. Someone had stood in this room, opened the cabinet, and removed the pieces of paper that proved I had been more than a guest in my own life. "There may be other copies," Caleb said. "Old attorneys. County records. Bank archives. Tax filings. But I need whatever you still have today." I looked around the study, at the framed photographs of Richard shaking hands with governors, bankers, and men who smiled too widely over charity checks. In each picture, he stood in the center. I was usually near the edge, one shoulder visible, a pearl earring catching the light, a hand resting politely at my side. Proof that I had been present, not proof that I had mattered. "There is something else," I said. "Last night, Vanessa looked at Richard when he said nobody was taking anything from me. It was fast, but I saw it." Caleb's voice softened. "Mrs. Whitaker, people look for permission from the person who knows the plan." I wrote that down without meaning to. The person who knows the plan. After we hung up, I spent the next hour moving through the house as if I were cleaning. That is one advantage older women have. People believe our routines are harmless. I dusted the hall table and checked the drawer beneath it. I carried laundry upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I watered the fern in the sunroom and looked behind the loose panel under the window seat where I had once hidden Daniel's Christmas train set. Nothing at first. Only the ordinary archaeology of a long marriage, warranty cards, old photographs, a receipt from a Savannah hotel where Richard and I stayed for our 20th anniversary, a stack of sympathy cards from Martha's service tied with a faded ribbon. Then, in the back of the linen closet, behind guest towels nobody used, I found a white banker's box with no label. I knew immediately it was not mine because I labeled everything. Inside were photocopies. Not originals, but enough to make my hands go still. There were pages from the trust agreement, a draft letter from a physician I did not know suggesting Richard had concerns about my judgment, and a printed email from Vanessa to an attorney named Miles Drayton. The words were polite. Polite words can be the most dangerous kind because they wear gloves. Vanessa had written that Richard wanted a smooth transition of authority and wished to avoid emotional distress for me. She referred to me as increasingly sentimental about outdated financial arrangements. I read that sentence 3 times. Increasingly sentimental. That was what they called a woman asking not to be erased. At the bottom of the box was a folder marked Household Updates. I opened it and found a list written in Vanessa's neat, narrow handwriting. Change safe combination. Move original records. Have Daniel speak to Eleanor about downsizing. Obtain signature before Thanksgiving. My son's name sat on the page like a bruise. Daniel had been quiet at dinner, yes, but quiet was not innocence. Quiet can be shelter. Quiet can also be consent. I sat on the hallway floor with the box beside me, the afternoon light making stripes across the carpet, and let myself remember the first time Vanessa called me forgetful. It had been Easter, 2 years earlier. I brought lemon bars to Daniel's house because his children used to love them. Vanessa laughed and said, "Oh, Eleanor, we told you we were avoiding sugar this year. You never remember these little things anymore." Everyone smiled. I apologized and put the lemon bars back in my car. Later, my granddaughter Lily slipped into the garage and whispered, "Grandma, nobody told you." I had dismissed it then. A small cruelty. A hostess trying to control her table. But after that came other moments. A changed dinner time. A misplaced invitation. A story retold with me as the confused old woman who got details wrong. Each incident had seemed too tiny to defend without sounding petty. That is how careful people diminish you. Not with one heavy stone, but with a teaspoon of sand every day until you are buried and they call it nature. My phone buzzed in my lap. A text from Vanessa appeared, bright and cheerful as a store window. "Hope you are feeling better today. I am stopping by around 4 with a few papers Richard wanted you to glance over. Nothing stressful." I looked at the banker's box. I looked at her list. Obtain signature before Thanksgiving. My fear did not rise. Something else did. Not anger exactly. Anger burns too hot and too fast. This was older, colder, and much more useful. I carried the box to my bedroom, removed the most important pages, and slid them into the large envelope where I kept Martha's letters. Then I put the box back exactly where I found it, towels in front, door closed, hallway quiet. At 4 o'clock, I would pour coffee. I would smile. I would let Vanessa believe the old woman was ready to be guided. But for the first time in years, I was not preparing to keep peace. I was preparing to keep proof. At 4 o'clock exactly, Vanessa arrived in a cream sweater, tan slacks, and the kind of gold jewelry that made no sound because it was chosen to look inherited, not purchased. She carried a leather folder against her chest and smiled through the glass door before I had even opened it, performing warmth for any neighbor who might glance across the lawn. I let her in and offered coffee. She accepted too quickly, which told me she wanted the visit to feel ordinary. People carrying traps often decorate them with manners. "Eleanor, you look so much better today," she said, stepping into my kitchen as if she had earned the right to inspect it. Richard was worried after last night. We all were. I took 2 mugs from the cabinet. Mine had a blue hydrangea painted on the side. Hers was one from the back row, plain white, the kind I used when someone had become a guest instead of family. "That was kind of him," I said. She sat at the breakfast table and placed the leather folder beside her elbow. Not in front of me. Not yet. She wanted to talk first, soften the ground before planting the stake. Outside, the sky had turned the color of pewter, and rain tapped gently against the windows. Charleston rain can make even a large house feel sealed off from the rest of the world. For years, I had loved that feeling. That afternoon, it felt useful. Vanessa wrapped both hands around her mug. I hope you understand Richard's intentions. He is not trying to hurt you. There it was, the first thread. When people begin by telling you someone does not mean harm, they usually know harm has already been done. What is he trying to do? I asked. She tilted her head with practiced sympathy. Protect you. Protect the family. These things get complicated at this stage of life. This stage of life. She was 39, young enough to believe age was a flaw that would never find her. I watched her eyes move around my kitchen, pausing on the framed photograph of Daniel at his college graduation, then on the silver tea service Richard's mother had left to me, then on the small stack of mail near the pantry door. She was not visiting. She was inventorying. Richard mentioned some papers, I said. Yes. She brightened, relieved that I had opened the door for her. Nothing serious. Just a few updates so bills, accounts, and household matters can be handled smoothly. You know how overwhelming paperwork can be. I nodded and took a slow sip of coffee. The taste was bitter because I had forgotten to add sugar. I did not get up to fix it. I managed paperwork for a long time. Vanessa laughed softly, as if I had made a charming little joke. Of course. But things are different now. Everything is digital, legal language changes, tax rules change. Richard just wants to avoid confusion. She opened the folder and slid a small stack of documents across the table. Her fingernails were pale pink and perfect. I noticed that because I needed to notice something ordinary while staring at papers designed to make me disappear. The top page was titled Consent to Administrative Authority. Beneath it were paragraphs of polished language, words like efficiency, continuity, medical discretion, and temporary delegation. I had read enough contracts in my life to know that temporary often means permanent when the wrong person controls the calendar. Where is Richard? I asked. At the club. He thought this might feel less stressful coming from me. Of course he did. Richard preferred other people to carry the unpleasant parts of his ambition. Bankers delivered bad terms. Assistants canceled plans. Wives absorbed consequences. Now Vanessa had become his soft voice with sharp edges. And Daniel knows about this? I asked without looking up. She hesitated just long enough. Daniel trusts his father. I placed one finger on the corner of the page and turned it. There was a signature line with my full legal name already typed beneath it, Eleanor Margaret Whitaker. Seeing my name there, waiting to be used against me, brought back a memory so clear I almost smelled furniture polish. Martha standing in this same kitchen 15 years earlier, hands red from washing crystal after one of Richard's donor dinners, watching me sign a check for Caleb's tuition. Do not ever be ashamed of being generous, she had said. Just keep the receipt. I had laughed then. Martha did not. She dried her hands and said, good women are often asked to prove what bad people only have to claim. At the time, I thought she was speaking from hardship. Now I understood she had been speaking from experience. Vanessa leaned forward. If you sign today, Richard can take this to Miles tomorrow and get everything moving before the holidays. It will be one less thing on your shoulders. Before the holidays. The list from the banker's box flashed in my mind. Obtain signature before Thanksgiving. They had not even changed the rhythm of the plan. They simply expected me not to hear the music. I lifted the top document and scanned the second page. There it was, buried in paragraph 4, authority over trust distributions, household assets, and investment accounts would transfer upon certification by Richard and an appointed advisor. Appointed by whom, the document did not say plainly. It did not need to. Do you have a pen? Vanessa asked gently. Too gently. I looked up at her. In the soft kitchen light, she could have passed for a concerned daughter-in-law, a modern woman helping an aging relative through a difficult transition. That was the danger of Vanessa. She did not look cruel. She looked efficient. I never sign anything before reading it completely, I said. Her smile thinned. Of course. I did not mean right this second. Good. I gathered the pages, tapped them once against the table to straighten the edges, and set them beside my mug. Leave them with me. Richard hoped to have them back tonight. Then Richard can hope. The words came out calm, almost pleasant. Vanessa blinked. It was the first honest expression I had seen on her face all afternoon. For a moment, the room belonged to the truth. She recovered quickly, picking up her mug though she did not drink. Eleanor, I really think delaying this will only create tension. I folded my hands on the table. Tension already lives here, Vanessa. I am only asking it to wait in the hall. Her cheeks colored faintly. She stood, smoothing the front of her sweater. I will tell Richard you need time. Tell him I am reading. She reached for the folder, but I placed my palm lightly on top of the documents. Not forcefully. Just enough. Her eyes dropped to my hand, then rose to my face. Something passed between us then, small and cold. She realized I was not as confused as she had written in her email. I realized she had no idea how much proof was already outside her reach. After she left, I watched her car pull out of the driveway and disappear beneath the moss-draped oaks. Only then did I lock the door. I carried the papers upstairs, slid them into Martha's envelope with the photocopied emails and the list from the linen closet, and called Caleb. When he answered, I said, "She brought the papers." He did not sound surprised. "Did you sign anything?" I looked at my wedding ring, then at my bare wrist where my mother's pearls used to rest. "No," I said. For once, I only kept what was mine. Caleb arrived in Charleston the next afternoon in a charcoal suit, carrying a brown leather briefcase and the kind of quiet focus that changes the air in a room before anyone speaks. I watched him step out of a rented sedan beneath the live oaks, and for one strange second I did not see the man he had become. I saw the thin boy who used to sit on our back steps with library books balanced on his knees, waiting for Martha to finish polishing silver in a house where people praised the shine but rarely noticed the hands. He paused at the walkway and looked up at the house, not with envy, not with resentment, but with recognition. Some places remember us even when the people inside pretend not to. When I opened the door, he removed his hat, though men hardly do that anymore, and said, "Mrs. Whittaker." Not Eleanor. Not ma'am in that careless way strangers use for older women. Mrs. Whittaker, with respect placed carefully around each syllable. I had not realized how hungry I was to hear my own name spoken as if it still carried weight. "Caleb," I said, and for a moment my voice almost betrayed me. He smiled gently. "My mother would have told me to wipe my shoes before stepping into this house. Your mother would have told you to come straight to the kitchen and eat something first." That made him laugh softly, and the sound loosened something old in me. I had prepared chicken salad, iced tea, and the last of the lemon pound cake from Sunday, not because he needed feeding but because I needed one familiar ritual that had not yet been poisoned. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Vanessa had slid those papers toward me less than 24 hours earlier. Caleb did not touch the folder right away. He looked around the room, at the blue hydrangea mug drying near the sink, at the brass key lying beside Martha's envelope, at the rain-dark garden beyond the windows. "She loved this kitchen," he said. "She said it was the only room in this house where the truth accidentally came out." I looked down at my hands. She saw too much. She saw clearly, he corrected. Then he opened his briefcase. No drama. No grand speech. Just a yellow pad, a laptop, a portable scanner, and 3 sharpened pencils. Competence can be a comfort when your life has been made deliberately confusing. I gave him everything: Vanessa's documents, the copied emails, the list from the linen closet, the trust pages, the old bank statements I had found, and the envelope of Martha's letters. He read in silence, his face revealing very little, though once his jaw tightened when he reached the phrase increasingly sentimental. I poured tea just to have something to do. Outside, a delivery truck passed. Somewhere upstairs, the old house creaked and settled as if listening with us. After nearly 40 minutes, Caleb leaned back. This is not just estate planning, he said. This is a transfer of control dressed up as concern. I folded my napkin into a small square. That is what I thought. They are relying on you signing before you receive independent advice. They are also creating a paper trail that suggests you are declining mentally. If enough people repeat that story, it becomes easier to make every objection you raise look like confusion. I thought of Easter. The lemon bars. The changed dinner times. Vanessa telling people I forgot things no one had told me. Tiny humiliations arranged like stepping stones. How long do you think they have been doing this? I asked. Caleb did not answer quickly. I respected him for that. Long enough to make it look natural. Natural. There was that word again, the soft blanket people throw over slow cruelty. He turned to the older documents. Now we need to establish what belongs to you separately, what was jointly built, and what Richard has represented as his alone. He scanned pages while I pulled more records from storage boxes I had carried down from the guest room closet. My grandmother's estate distribution from 1978. The first deposit into Whitaker Supply. A loan guarantee with my signature. The lease on the North Charleston warehouse. Cancelled checks from an account opened before my marriage. Each paper seemed small by itself, dry and yellowed and ordinary, but together they began to speak in a voice louder than Richard's. At 3:20, Caleb stopped on one check and turned it toward me. Do you recognize this? I leaned closer. $10,000, dated March 3, 1982, payable to Whitaker Supply Company. The signature was mine. That was the month Richard almost lost the first vendor contract, I said. He told everyone the bank extended him credit. Caleb shook his head. This came from your separate inheritance account. I knew that, of course. I had always known it in the quiet drawer of my mind where women store things they are told not to mention. But seeing Caleb write it down made the memory stand up straight. We worked until the afternoon light thinned. He created 3 piles: proven separate funds, joint marital contributions, and questionable transfers. The 3rd pile grew fastest. Every so often, he asked me a precise question, and I answered with dates I did not know I still carried. April 1986, when Richard missed payroll. July 1991, when we refinanced the house. November 1998, when my father's final bonds matured and Richard said investing them through the company would be cleaner. Cleaner for whom, I should have asked. I did not. I was busy being loyal. Near sunset, Caleb opened Martha's last letter. I had almost forgotten it was there. The paper was thin, folded twice, her handwriting smaller than it had been before she got sick. Caleb read silently, then closed his eyes. She knew, he said. Knew what? He handed it to me. One sentence had been underlined. Mrs. Whitaker gave this family more than they will ever admit, and one day somebody may need to say so with proof. I touched the ink with my fingertip. Martha had been gone 9 years, yet there she was, still setting a cup of tea beside my elbow, still reminding me to keep the receipt. Caleb looked at the piles of paper spread across my kitchen table. Mrs. Whitaker, your husband did not build everything from nothing. A significant part. of what he calls his started with you. The house was quiet. My wedding ring felt suddenly heavy. Then why do I feel like I am stealing something by saying it? Caleb's expression softened, but his voice stayed firm. Because they taught you that telling the truth about your own contribution was selfish. I looked toward the dining room, where Richard had laughed at me in front of everyone. For the first time, the memory did not shrink me. It clarified me. I stood, walked to the silver drawer, and took out the old company seal I had kept wrapped in cloth since the early years. Richard thought it was lost. I placed it on the table beside the documents. Caleb stared at it, then smiled for the first time that afternoon. That may matter. I sat back down. Good, I said. I am tired of being the only thing in this house that does not. By 8 that evening, the kitchen table looked less like a place for meals and more like the inside of a life finally opened for inspection. Caleb had sorted the documents into clean stacks, each labeled with a yellow note in his careful handwriting. Separate inheritance funds. Original business capital. Property records. Trust concerns. Possible misrepresentation. I sat across from him with a cold cup of tea between my hands, listening as rain softened the windows and the old refrigerator hummed in the corner. Richard had called twice from his club and left one message saying he would be home late. His voice had carried that familiar irritation, not worry, not curiosity, only the annoyance of a man whose schedule had been disturbed by a wife taking too long to obey. I did not call back. Instead, I watched Caleb compare signatures from different years, lining them up beneath the kitchen light. This is important, he said, tapping one page with his pencil. In 1998, your father's bonds matured and the proceeds were transferred into a company account. But this transfer memo says the funds were contributed by Richard Whittaker personally. I leaned closer. The page was a copy, but the typed words were clear. Richard Whittaker personally. He told me it was just an accounting shortcut, I said. He said since we were married, it did not matter whose name appeared on the memo. Caleb looked at me over his glasses. It mattered. 2 words. Plain. Heavy. I had spent so many years letting things not matter. The missing bracelet did not matter. The loan in my name did not matter. The Christmas bonus I gave up did not matter. The fact that Richard accepted praise for decisions I made did not matter. A woman can be trained to survive by shrinking the size of every insult until even theft looks like an inconvenience. Caleb pulled another page forward. And here, the Charleston house. The down payment came from your premarital account. The deed was later amended, but I do not see evidence that you received independent counsel before the change. I remembered that day. August heat. Daniel starting high school. Richard impatient in the attorney's office because he had a lunch meeting and hated waiting. The lawyer had been his friend from Rotary, a smiling man with silver hair who said the amendment was standard housekeeping. I signed because Richard squeezed my shoulder and said, "Do not make this complicated, Ellie." I had loved being called Ellie then. Now the memory made my skin feel tight. I trusted him, I said. Caleb's expression did not change, but his voice softened. Trust does not give someone permission to rewrite history. Around 9:30, he connected his laptop to a county records database and began pulling public filings. The names appeared one by one, cold and official. Whittaker Supply Holdings. Whittaker Family Trust. Low Country Commercial Properties. Each entity sounded independent, respectable, carefully built. Caleb traced them like roads on a map, showing me where money had moved, where ownership had shifted, where my name appeared briefly and then vanished. Not disappeared all at once. That would have been too obvious. My name had been thinned over time, like ink fading in sunlight. This is how they do it, Caleb said quietly. They do not always take everything in a single act. They make small changes while life is busy. A child leaving for college. A parent passing away. A holiday season. An illness. They count on good people being distracted by love and duty. Love and duty. The two handles by which I had been carried wherever Richard needed me. I stood to stretch my back and walked to the sink. In the dark glass above it, my reflection looked pale but unfamiliar in a useful way. I did not see the woman from Sunday night, folding her napkin while everyone looked away. I saw my mother's jaw. My grandmother's eyes. Women who had crossed oceans, survived depressions, buried husbands, raised children, and still balanced accounts in pencil at the kitchen table. I wondered when I had started believing softness meant surrender. Behind me, Caleb opened another folder. Mrs. Whittaker. Something in his tone made me turn. He held up a copy of a draft affidavit. This appears to be a statement prepared for Daniel. My son's name moved through the room like a draft under a locked door. I returned to the table and sat down. The affidavit was not signed, but the language was prepared. Daniel would state that he had observed increased confusion, emotional volatility, and difficulty understanding financial matters in his mother over the last several years. My eyes moved over the words once, then again. Increased confusion. Emotional volatility. Difficulty understanding. All those little moments Vanessa had staged now had a destination. They were building a road, and they wanted my son to pave the final stretch. He has not signed it, Caleb said. I heard the kindness in that. He was offering me the smallest mercy available. Not yet, I replied. My voice sounded far away, but steady. I thought of Daniel at 7 years old, feverish with the flu, sleeping against my chest while Richard traveled for a sales meeting. I thought of Daniel at 17, denting the family car and crying in the garage because he thought his father would stop loving him. I had stood between that boy and Richard's disappointment more times than Daniel would ever know. Now Richard wanted him to stand between me and my own name. Caleb did not rush me. He gathered the affidavit, placed it in the trust concerns pile, and made a note. We need to move before they finalize this. What does move mean? I asked. First, I request a complete copy of the trust documents. And any proposed amendments as your counsel. Second, we notify the relevant financial institutions that you dispute any transfer of authority and that no changes should be processed without direct verification. Third, we preserve everything you found. Fourth, we set a meeting where Richard cannot control the room. I almost laughed at that. Richard had spent his life controlling rooms. Seating arrangements, introductions, who spoke first, who got interrupted, whose memory counted. He will be furious, I said. Caleb closed the laptop halfway. Fury is not a legal argument. That sentence settled over me like a shawl. I wrote it down on the corner of my napkin because I wanted to remember the exact shape of it. Fury is not a legal argument. At 10:15, headlights washed across the front windows. Richard was home. Caleb calmly stacked the most sensitive documents into his briefcase. I placed Martha's envelope in the lower drawer of the china cabinet, beneath the linen runners she had once ironed by hand. Richard's key turned in the front door. His footsteps crossed the foyer, confident and uneven from the bourbon he always claimed was just one drink. He stopped when he saw Caleb standing in my kitchen. For the first time in days, my husband had no prepared smile. What is he doing here? Richard asked. I stood beside the table, my hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. Caleb answered before I could. I am reviewing documents for Mrs. Whittaker. Richard looked from him to me, then back again, trying to place the face. When he did, his mouth curled. Martha's boy? The old insult dressed as recognition. Caleb did not flinch. Caleb Bell, he said, taking a business card from his pocket and setting it on the table. Attorney at law. Richard stared at the card as if it had been placed there in a language he refused to read. I watched the first hairline crack appear in his certainty. It was small. Almost invisible. But I had learned to respect small cracks. Given enough pressure, they can bring down a wall. Richard stood in the kitchen doorway with rain on the shoulders of his coat and disbelief tightening his face. He had always been skilled at entering a room as if he owned not just the furniture, but the air. That night, the air did not move for him. Caleb's business card remained on the table between us, small, white, and unbothered. Richard looked at it, then at Caleb, then at me, searching for the familiar Eleanor, the one who would apologize for the awkwardness, offer a plate, smooth the wrinkle before anyone else noticed the fabric had torn. I did not move. "This is ridiculous," Richard said finally, tossing his keys into the brass bowl by the door. They landed too hard, but not hard enough to frighten anyone. "Eleanor, you invited him into our home to go through private papers?" "Our home." He remembered the word "our" only when it helped him. Caleb closed his briefcase with a soft click. "Mrs. Whittaker asked me to review documents concerning her financial interests." Richard laughed, but it came out thinner than usual. Her financial interests? She would not know where to begin. There it was again, the habit of making me smaller in front of another man. Once, that sentence would have sent heat into my face. I would have rushed to prove myself or retreated into silence. This time, I only looked at the kitchen clock. 10:23. Ordinary time. Extraordinary clarity. "I began before you did," I said. Richard's eyes cut toward me. "Excuse me?" Whittaker Supply began with my inheritance money. The Charleston house began with my down payment. The first warehouse lease carried my signature. I remember all of it. For a second, I saw not anger but alarm. True alarm is quick. It passes before pride can cover it. Richard removed his coat and draped it over a chair, buying time. "You are confused. Those were marital decisions. We made them together." "Some of them, yes," Caleb said. "Others appear to involve separate funds, incomplete disclosures, and transfers Mrs. Whittaker may not have been properly advised on." Richard turned on him sharply. "You do not know a thing about this family." Caleb's expression remained calm. "I know what the records show." "Records." Richard said the word as if it were dirty. "Do you honestly think old papers will change anything?" I thought of Martha's letter beneath the linen. Runners, of the company seal wrapped in cloth, of the missing folders, of Vanessa's list. Old papers had changed everything. They had waited longer than I had. "They already have," I said. Richard stepped farther into the kitchen. His voice lowered into the tone he used when he wanted me to feel childish. "Eleanor, this has gone far enough. You are embarrassing yourself." Caleb looked at me, not to rescue me, but to make sure I wanted to answer. That small courtesy nearly undid me. For most of my married life, people had spoken over me in the name of protecting me. Caleb waited. "No," I said. "I embarrassed myself for years by letting you tell our story alone." Richard's mouth tightened. "Is this about Sunday? One comment, and suddenly you are bringing strangers into our business?" "Caleb is not a stranger." Richard glanced at him with cold amusement. "Right. Martha's son." Caleb did not shift, but I saw the smallest change in his eyes. Not hurt. Restraint. "My mother respected Mrs. Whittaker," he said. "That is why I am here." Richard waved a hand. "Your mother was paid for her work." The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. I heard the refrigerator hum, the rain against the glass, the faint tick of the wall clock. Caleb's voice stayed even. "She was. And she did her work with more dignity than many people show while signing checks." Richard flushed. A man like Richard could tolerate accusation more easily than quiet comparison. He turned back to me. "What do you want?" Such a simple question, Asked as if I were being difficult over a restaurant bill. What did I want? I wanted my mother's bracelet back, though it had been melted into a company Christmas bonus before Daniel started middle school. I wanted the 23-year-old version of myself to hear her father's warning and believe him. I wanted every dinner guest who praised Richard's genius to know who stayed up balancing the accounts. But wanting backward is a useless kind of hunger. I want complete copies of the trust documents, I said. All amendments, all drafts, all communications with Miles Drayton, and all records related to proposed changes in authority. Richard stared at me. You have been coached. I have been informed. By him. By proof. His face hardened. Vanessa was right. This is exactly the kind of emotional overreaction we were concerned about. There it was, brought into the room like a prepared witness. Vanessa's script in Richard's mouth. I nodded slowly, almost to myself. So there is a we. Richard hesitated. Do not twist my words. I do not have to twist them. They arrive that way. Caleb placed another card on the table. Mr. Whittaker, going forward, any documents requiring Mrs. Whittaker's signature should be sent to my office. No direct pressure, no informal drop-offs, no requests presented as household convenience. Richard looked at the card as if it had offended him personally. And if I refuse? Then that will also become part of the record. Record. The word landed better the second time. Richard picked up his coat, then set it down again. He wanted to leave, but leaving would look like losing. He wanted to shout, but Caleb's calm made shouting look unsafe. He wanted me alone, and that was the one thing he could no longer have. The phone on the counter lit up. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. Richard saw it. I saw it. Caleb saw it. No one reached for it. The ringing stopped, then began again. Richard finally grabbed the phone and turned away, speaking low. Not now. But the kitchen was quiet enough for me to hear Vanessa's voice, sharp and small through the speaker. Did she sign? Richard, Miles needs to know by morning. Richard closed his eyes. For the first time, Vanessa had entered the room without her smile. I picked up my cold tea and took one sip. It tasted bitter, but honest. Richard ended the call without answering her. When he turned around, his face had lost its polished certainty. This is a misunderstanding, he said. I looked at the man I had loved, defended, excused, and financed, and saw how quickly power calls itself misunderstanding when it is finally questioned. No, I said quietly. This is the first accurate conversation we have had in years. Caleb lifted his briefcase. I will return tomorrow morning, Mrs. Whittaker. Richard looked from him to me, realizing Caleb had not asked his permission. That, more than anything, seemed to unsettle him. I walked Caleb to the front door. Before he stepped into the rain, he said softly, keep the doors locked tonight. Not because you should be afraid, but because boundaries should make a sound. I locked the door behind him and listened to the bolt slide into place. It was a small sound. Clean. Final. Then I turned back toward the kitchen, where Richard stood under the warm light, surrounded by the house he had mistaken for proof of his own greatness. For the first time since Sunday, he looked unsure where to stand. Richard did not sleep in the guest room that night. He stayed in his study with the door closed, making phone calls he thought I could not hear. But houses learn the habits of the people inside them, and our old Charleston home carried sound through vents, under doors, along the polished hallway floors I had waxed every spring for 30 years. I did not press my ear to anything. I did not need to. His voice rose and fell in pieces while I sat in my bedroom chair with a folded blanket over my knees, reading Martha's last letter again under the soft light of the lamp. She has counsel now, he said once. Later, no, she did not sign. Then, after a longer silence, find out how much he knows. He never said my name. Not once. That is how I knew he was afraid. Men like Richard use your name when they want control. They avoid it when you become real. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Mom, what is going on? Dad says you brought in a lawyer and are making accusations. Please do not let Vanessa get blamed for trying to help. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Please do not let Vanessa get blamed. Not, are you all right? Not, I am sorry I stayed silent. Not, did Dad really speak to you that way? I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. A mother can spend a lifetime translating her child's selfishness into stress, confusion, or someone else's influence. That night, I was too tired to translate. I wrote only, we will speak when you are ready to ask me what happened, not tell me what to forgive. Then I turned the phone face down. In the morning, Caleb returned with a banker's box of his own and a woman named Anita Brooks, a forensic accountant from Savannah with silver braids, rimless glasses, and a calm manner that made even Richard's marble foyer feel less important. She shook my hand and said, Mrs. Whitaker, I have reviewed the preliminary documents. There is a pattern here. A pattern. Such a polite word for years of being rearranged out of your own story. We worked in the dining room because the kitchen table was no longer large enough. I watched strangers place laptops, scanners, files, and evidence across the same mahogany table where Richard had humiliated me 2 nights earlier. It felt almost ceremonial, as if the room itself had been asked to testify. Caleb requested documents from Miles Drayton, the attorney Vanessa had contacted. He sent formal notices to the bank, the investment firm, and the trustee's office. Anita traced transfers with colored tabs. Blue for my separate funds. Yellow for joint funds. Red for questionable movement. By noon, red tabs lined the table like warning flags. Richard came downstairs at 12:15, freshly dressed, smelling of aftershave and stubbornness. He stopped at the dining room entrance when he saw Anita. Who is this now? He asked. Caleb stood. Anita Brooks. Forensic accountant. Richard gave a short, humorless laugh. Eleanor, you are turning this house into a courtroom. I looked up from a 1991 refinance document. No, Richard. I am turning it back into a place where facts are allowed. Anita did not smile, but I saw her pen pause for half a second. Richard stepped into the room and lowered his voice as though the performance of concern might still work. Ellie, this is humiliating. We can discuss this privately. Ellie. The old name placed gently on the table like bait. Once, it would have pulled me toward him. Once, I would have remembered our first apartment, the squeaky bed frame, the paper plates, the way he kissed my forehead when our electric bill was overdue and promised we would laugh about it someday. We had laughed. Then he had kept the laughter and handed me the bill. You had years to discuss it. Privately, I said. You chose Vanessa, Miles, and a physician I have never met. Richard's face changed. He had not known I found the draft letter. That was only precautionary. No, Caleb said. That was documentation being prepared to question Mrs. Whitaker's capacity while simultaneously asking her to sign authority away. That timing is concerning. Richard pointed at him. I do not answer to you. No, Caleb said evenly. You answer to records. It was the second time he had said something so plain that the room seemed to settle around it. Richard turned and left without another word, but his exit no longer felt powerful. It felt like a man leaving a room because the furniture had stopped agreeing with him. By late afternoon, Miles Drayton finally responded. He claimed he had only drafted documents at Richard's request and had not been informed of any dispute. Caleb read the email aloud while Anita continued marking pages. Miles offered a meeting the next morning at his office downtown to clarify intentions. Clarify intentions. I had learned that phrase by then. It meant they wanted a chance to dress the truth in a better suit. You do not have to go, Caleb said. I looked through the dining room window at the oaks bending slightly in the damp wind. Yes, I do. He studied me for a moment. Then we go prepared. That evening, I opened my closet and chose a navy dress with long sleeves and a pearl pin shaped like a magnolia, the last pearl piece I owned after selling my mother's bracelet all those years ago. I laid it over the chair and polished my black shoes with a tissue. Small rituals matter when people expect you to arrive shaken. Richard did not come to dinner. Daniel did not call. Vanessa sent one text saying she hoped I was not being manipulated by outsiders. I almost admired the nerve of that word. Outsiders. Caleb, whose mother had held my household together. Anita, who saw the numbers clearly. Outsiders, because they did not benefit from my silence. Before bed, I went downstairs to the china cabinet and removed Martha's envelope from beneath the linen runners. I added the draft affidavit for Daniel, Vanessa's list, and a copy of the old check that started Richard's company. Then I placed the company seal in my purse. It was heavier than I remembered, round and cold against my palm. At 7 the next morning, Caleb picked me up in front of the house. The Charleston air smelled of wet brick and coffee from a neighbor's kitchen. Richard's car was already gone, which meant he wanted to arrive first and control the room. That almost made me smile. Some men confuse early arrival with ownership. Miles Drayton's office was on the 4th floor of a restored building near Broad Street, all exposed brick, polished floors, and framed certificates meant to make ordinary people feel underdressed. Richard sat at the conference table when we entered, Vanessa beside him in a pale blue dress, Daniel near the window looking tired and uncomfortable. Miles stood with professional warmth stretched too thin across his face. Richard's eyes went straight to my purse, then to Caleb. You brought him again. I sat down across from my husband, placed my purse gently on the floor, and folded my hands on the table. No, Richard, I said. He brought me. For the first time in 45 years, I watched my husband realize I had not come to be persuaded. I had come with witnesses. The conference room was colder than it needed to be. Offices like that always are, chilled to make people sit straighter, speak carefully, and mistake discomfort for authority. Miles Drayton took the chair at the head of the table, though it was his office, and Richard allowed it with visible irritation. Vanessa sat to Richard's right, a leather notebook open in front of her, pen poised as if she were there to record decisions already made. Daniel stood by the window for too long before finally sitting near the corner, not beside me, not beside his father, but in the narrow space people choose when they want guilt to look neutral. Caleb placed his briefcase on the table and removed one folder. Anita Brooks sat beside him with her laptop open, calm as a church secretary and twice as watchful. Miles cleared his throat. I think we are all here because there has been some misunderstanding regarding administrative updates to the Whitaker Family Trust. I looked at his perfectly knotted tie and wondered how many ugly things in this world had been introduced as updates. Caleb opened the folder. Before we discuss intentions, we need to address documents prepared for Mrs. Whitaker's signature, proposed changes in trust authority, and statements questioning her capacity. Miles shifted in his chair. Those documents were preliminary. Preliminary does not mean harmless, Caleb said. Richard leaned back, trying to reclaim the room with posture. This has become absurd. Eleanor is upset because of one dinner conversation. Vanessa and I were trying to make things easier. Vanessa lowered her eyes at exactly the right moment. I care about this family, she said softly. I would never want Eleanor overwhelmed. There it was again, the velvet wrapping around the blade. I reached into my purse and placed the old company seal on the table. It made a small, solid sound. Everyone looked at it except Caleb, who already knew. Richard's face tightened. Where did you find that? In my things, I said. Where many forgotten truths seem to have survived. Caleb began with the first check, the one from my separate inheritance account in 1982. He did not embellish. He did not accuse more than the paper allowed. He simply placed copies before Miles, Richard, Vanessa, and Daniel, then explained how the first capital contribution to Whittaker Supply came from my premarital funds. Anita followed with the 1998 bond transfer, the memo that falsely listed Richard as the personal contributor, and the later property amendments where I had signed without separate counsel. Each fact landed quietly. Quiet facts are the hardest to argue with because they do not raise their voices for you to criticize. Richard interrupted twice. The first time, Caleb let him finish and then returned to the document. The second time, Anita looked over her glasses and said, "Mr. Whittaker, the numbers do not change because you are uncomfortable with them." Daniel looked down at his hands. I watched him read the draft affidavit prepared in his name, watched color rise slowly into his face. He turned to Richard. "Dad, what is this?" Richard waved a hand. "A precaution. Your mother has been emotional." Daniel's voice dropped. "I never agreed to say this." Vanessa touched his arm. "Daniel, nobody was forcing you. We just needed everyone prepared." He pulled his arm away. "It was a small movement, but motherhood has trained me to read small movements." For the first time, my son looked not confused, but ashamed. Caleb then produced Vanessa's handwritten list. Change safe combination. Move original records. Have Daniel speak to Eleanor about downsizing. Obtain signature before Thanksgiving. Miles removed his glasses and set them down. The professional warmth had disappeared from his face. Vanessa went very still. Richard stared at the list as if he could make the ink evaporate by disapproving of it. "That was private household planning," Vanessa said. Her voice had lost its sweetness. "That was a plan to isolate Mrs. Whittaker from information and pressure her into signing," Caleb replied. Miles turned toward Richard. "You did not disclose the existence of disputed ownership records or independent counsel." Richard's jaw tightened. "Because there was no dispute until she created one." I looked at him then, truly looked, not as a wife searching for the man she once loved, but as a woman studying the person who had mistaken her devotion for weakness. "No, Richard," I said. "The dispute began the first time you told our story without me in it." The room became silent in a way that felt earned. Caleb laid out the next steps: formal suspension of all proposed trust amendments, written notice to financial institutions, preservation of records, independent accounting of all entities connected to the trust, and review of transfers involving my separate funds. Miles agreed too quickly, which told me he understood the danger had shifted. Richard was no longer guiding a family matter. He was defending a record. Vanessa closed her notebook. Her pen had not touched the page once. Daniel finally spoke, not loudly. "Mom, I did not know." I wanted to comfort him. The habit rose in me automatically, like reaching for a light switch in the dark. But I kept my hands folded. "You did not ask," I said. The words hurt him. They hurt me too. Truth often does. Richard stood abruptly. "So what now, Eleanor? You want an apology? Money? The house?" I looked at the seal, at the check, at Martha's letter resting in Caleb's folder, at the room full of people who had finally been required to hear me in complete sentences. "I want an audit. I want my legal rights restored in writing. I want every proposed document withdrawn. I want no one speaking about my mind, my money, or my future without me present. And I want you out of the Charleston house until this review is complete." Richard's mouth opened, then closed. He had expected tears, perhaps a demand, perhaps a scene he could call unstable. He had not expected terms. Caleb slid a prepared notice across the table. Richard did not touch it. Miles did. That was when I knew the meeting was over. Not because everything was fixed. Not because years of erasure could be undone in one morning. but because the room had stopped obeying Richard's version of events. I stood and picked up the company seal, holding it in my palm. It was cold, heavy, real. Vanessa avoided my eyes. Daniel looked at me with the frightened sadness of a son seeing his mother as a person instead of a place to return when convenient. Richard stared straight ahead, his face pale beneath the office lights. At the door, he said, almost bitterly, "You would do this to your own husband?" I turned back once. "No, Richard. I finally stopped doing things to myself for you." Caleb opened the door, and I stepped into the hallway. Outside, Broad Street was bright with late morning sun, the wet sidewalks shining as if the whole city had been washed clean overnight. I did not feel young. I did not feel triumphant. I felt named. After 45 years of being introduced as Richard Whittaker's wife, I walked out of that office as Eleanor Margaret Whittaker, the woman whose signature had started everything, and whose silence had ended that day.